Welcome to Eye on America. I'm Michelle Miller. From helping Mother Nature to celebrating diverse communities, we take you across the country to meet those who are making our nation whole. First, we head into the wild for a closer look at the role hunting has on America's conservation efforts. I recently visited conservationists in Montana to see how a decline in hunting may take a toll on preserving our wildlife. In one of the most picturesque parts of America, home to 2 national parks, an array of wildlife. Come on!
That's a good-looking bird.
And the foothills of the Blackfoot River.
I want that thing coming straight over the back of your head. Okay.
Montana mountain man Lan Tawney tried to teach a novice
Set. Like I'm going to tell you that.
how to fly fish.
Good cast, dude. Holy cow.
Not an easy feat. I'm a fly fisherwoman!
You got that right.
Woo-hoo! But as founder of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, he's used to it.
Anybody can do this. This water belongs to everybody in America. They have public access to this water.
This fishing hole was a favorite of his parents, conservation lobbyists trying to preserve the native West.
When you are out in the outdoors like we are today, you get an appreciation of that. When we had that eagle that was up in the trees, or, when we catch a fish, ultimately.
Or haven't.
When we catch a fish, yeah, we got a fish.
Oh, we got a little baby fish.
It's like you have a connection now to this river.
Tawney knows as both hunter and gun owner, his status as protector of the environment might come into question, but he believes all 3 can coexist.
It really is the Bambi effect. How do you tell someone who comes from that perspective that hunting's a bad thing, that what you're doing, something that actually helps the environment?
So you bring up Bambi. Are there some hunters like that? Absolutely, but they're ostracized. That idea of take and not being connected to those animals. As a hunter, it's regulated, it's scientifically managed, and so this isn't like I can go shoot as many deer as I want. There's rules and regulations around that. I'm required to eat those animals, and I would say that feeding my family, that connection I have to that animal, I'm in their habitat. When I'm hunting, I'm not an observer, I'm a participant. And so I know more about them and I have such an appreciation for them. And so I want to make sure that those animals are going to be out there forever and that they're going to thrive.
That symbiotic relationship began over a century ago with President Theodore Roosevelt. An outdoorsman and trophy hunter, he also witnessed its detrimental impact, realizing our nation's natural resources were in limited supply. So while setting aside 240 million acres to establish our national park system, he also helped end the practice of market hunting.
It is so beautiful.
Setting the tone for our conservation ethos.
How awesome it is that we get to be the caretakers right now and play a part in all this public lands that's available to everybody. We're playing a role that's really been around for about 150 years.
By 1937, the hunting community lobbied Congress to tax the industry. And today, that legacy funds 60% of state-based conservation efforts through the sale of hunting and fishing licenses, as well as excise taxes on gear, guns, and ammunition. I paid for my little fishing license. How did I put into the conservation effort?
When you pay for your fishing license, the money for your license goes to the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Martha Williams leads the agency.
And then that goes out to states and partners to make sure that we know the fish populations can be healthy, to make sure that there are boat ramps and there's access for you to be able to get on the river or the stream. It makes sure that you have, hopefully, a really great experience.
Williams acknowledges hunters pay far more into the system. They're just 4% of the population, but their numbers have been on the decline, down from 17 million in the mid-1970s to 11.5 million in 2016. That is, until the pandemic turned America's attention back to the great outdoors.
What we saw across the board in all states was more and more people getting outside, more and more people using our public lands.
What are you seeing in terms of the money brought in to conserve public lands?
We have seen a continuing increase in the excise taxes. We've seen more money come in from ammunition sales, from hunting and tackle gear. we've seen those revenues increase.
But that trend may not be permanent. Isn't there, though, a concern that as fewer hunters participate in hunting season, that may affect your bottom line?
I mean, yes.
In the conservation effort?
Yes, it does.
Are you looking at ways to change this system?
We are always looking at other ways to fund conservation in this country beyond hunting and fishing excise taxes. And then add to that, always wanting to build and bring more people into hunting and fishing so that it continues.
So basically, you're widening, you're
Absolutely, we want to widen the tent.
widening that tent, she says, might include levying a so-called backpack tax on recreational users of public lands, hikers, bikers, and kayakers. Others believe the federal government should foot more of the bill, but Congress has yet to act on the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. For now,
You're paying the price of keeping our forests and our rivers and our streams healthy.
Gladly, we're paying the price. Gladly, we're paying the price. I think we wear that on our sleeve, but it's not enough. And so how are we going to continue to fund our wildlife agencies that are in charge of managing these species? How are we going to continue to fund the restoration and conservation that needs to happen? But what I love even more is this idea of people that don't hunt and fish wearing that on their sleeve like we do. I love that.
now we move on to another group of people who are protecting the earth, this time from the kitchen. In an effort to cut down on greenhouse gas emissions, a California startup is cooking up an alternative source of protein from thin air. Carter Evans shows us how.
Today we're going to be making a little air protein chicken korma.
It's a classic Indian dish with a twist.
It looks like regular chicken the way it cooks. You know, it gets that little crust on the outside there.
That's the beauty of it.
Physicist Lisa Dyson is the founder and CEO of Air Protein, and CBS News is getting an exclusive look at a product she says has the taste and texture of meat, but does not come from animals. It's created using a fermentation process similar to making yogurt, but instead of using microbes that consume milk and sugar, Air Protein uses microbes that eat oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide.
How does it work?
You start off with cultures, then you feed it elements of the air, and it grows and grows and grows, just like that yogurt culture. You dry that, and you get to a protein-rich flour.
And that can be processed to mimic chicken, seafood, and beef.
We can grow enough material to make a steak in a matter of hours.
The concept for Air Protein came from NASA in the 60s as a way to recycle the CO2 astronauts exhale and turn it into food. Dyson developed the technology to help fight climate change.
The food industry today produces more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector. What's going to happen when we have 10 billion people?
Bon appetit.
Really good.
For now, we'll have to take Dyson's word for it. She says only a small circle of people, including investors, have tried it.
When are we going to get to the point where outsiders like me can try it?
Very soon. Not yet, but very soon.
Air chicken is still in the beginning phase of the USDA approval process. It could start hitting store shelves early next year when ultimately consumers will decide if it indeed tastes like chicken.
Still ahead, Asian American women are coming together to celebrate their stories amid a wave of hate incidents against the AAPI community. You're watching Eye on America. A surge of hate incidents and attacks against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders during the COVID-19 pandemic have made recent headlines and renewed conversations about public safety. But in New York, a group of Asian American women are coming together to show strength and celebrate their experiences. Here's Jean Song.
I always tell her 보고 싶어, meaning I miss you in Korean.
I had to wipe so many tears off my Kindle. It was so annoying because it kept losing my place, Daniel said.
It was an evening of prose and literary imagination, but this community reading series was also an outlet for Asian women writers to share their voices.
Asian female writers have beautiful, complex stories that are so multifaceted, so many layers to it that aren't before this time frequently shown within the publishing industry. So having a space in which we are saying, pause, listen to us, this is what we're trying to say, this is what we're trying to share, is something that's truly important.
Lucy Yu is the owner of You and Me Books in Manhattan's Chinatown. She hosted the event in collaboration with the Cosmos, a community organization for Asian women co-founded by Cassandra Lam and Karen Mock.
We create events and experiences, content like this, to center the experiences of Asian women. Storytelling for our community is a way to understand our experience as Asian Americans. A lot of us come from families where identity was not a part of the dinner table conversation. We didn't necessarily study Asian American studies in college. And I think in our community, I've just seen so many people think that their story is insignificant because it hasn't been shown on the public sphere. And my hope is that this reading series and the work that I do as an organizer is to try and reach every person with that message. Your story matters.
Well, thank you so much for supporting. I really appreciate it.
You runs the first Asian American women-owned bookstore in New York City.
I think there's a lack of places kind of showcasing our stories, our immigrant stories. And once I did research, I realized there was no lack of work out there. It's just a lack of what's being pushed forward.
Amid rising hate crimes against the AAPI community during the COVID-19 pandemic, both Mock and Yu have responded, from creating what the Cosmos calls collective rest healing spaces to handing out pepper spray and personal alarms.
In addition to a lot of the partnerships I've done with other organizations, Soar Over Hate, I think that was something just for other people to see more than 1,000 AAPI women and femmes line up for that, how important it was and how unsafe we are feeling, but also offering love and joy in those stories. I think a lot of people come in, especially in the last couple of weeks, they're like, do you have something mindless, funny, but also has representation? And I'm like, yeah, I want to see joy too, and that's a way of healing. And so I think in any aspect of feeling seen, of feeling just a little less alone, there's a lot of avenues to kind of approach that.
As both Yu and the Cosmos build their respective communities, their missions also align.
One is creating a space in which we feel protected, feel loved, and feel safe. And another is okay, we have all this energy and all this anger. How do we channel that to actually cause change in the policies and cause change to make us feel safer?
I can find solace in looking at her face, in the intimacy of the present.
It's not the kind of space that asks you to perform in a certain way. Once they hear the power of their own voice, they're able to actually see themselves as agents of creating that space as well.
The main one being, how do you forgive yourself? A delightful buzz took root in her head as she waited for the elevator. Thank you.
Now to a problem in the skies. In the U.S. alone, hundreds of millions of birds die every year from collisions with buildings. The phenomenon has drastically reduced the population of some bird species. But as Brooke Silva Braga shows us, the city of brotherly love is taking notice and extending that love to birds.
So here's a map of our route that we take. I can do it blindfolded or drunk, I've done it so many times.
Before sunrise, Stephen Maciejewski is searching Center City, Philadelphia for fallen birds.
During the night, it's very dark, so they see that light, they want to get in there for whatever reason. Yeah. They don't understand glass is hard.
Stephen's daily report,
and then the poor thing gets put in the bag,
goes to the Audubon Society's Keith Russell.
We're also pleased to not find birds,
who has spent 15 years documenting these dead birds to push Philadelphia to help solve a global problem.
It's a factor in the decline of lots of species. Since 1970, we've lost about a third of our birds.
Look. The design of modern buildings is partly to blame. They're often towers of reflective glass that look to birds like more open sky.
All these new buildings, they're just really glass and glass and more glass.
Well, that's true of most cities.
But if they make a building that's basically a big sheet of endless glass, that means they are not addressing this problem.
That's creating a problem, definitely.
At one building, I think I found about 300 birds.
At one building?
One building.
A cloudy night at the peak of the fall migration caused a massacre.
One guy brought a dustpan of birds, He dumped it out in front of me. There were 75 birds in there, some living and a lot of dead birds. It was a rough day.
But Stephen's photo of the slaughter made headlines that got the notice of people like Corey Gunselman, who manages One Liberty Place.
It's been a problem, honestly. We do notice the collisions that do happen.
Thanks to a trade group, building managers like Gunselman finally heard Keith Russell's pitch. They could save birds and some energy by turning off the exterior lighting that seems to confuse birds at night. Gunselman signed on.
And we have new controls that we input. Lights off at midnight, only April through May.
This is what it has looked like this spring, as the most prominent buildings in Philadelphia's skyline darken their lights and let the birds follow the stars. Lights Out Philadelphia follows similar programs in nearly 40 other American cities.
They use the stars in part to navigate, which might explain why they're attracted to lights in some cases.
Jason Weckstein, an ornithologist at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, says there's reason to think the dark sky will help.
We know in other places there are significant differences. This building, McCormick Place on the Chicago lakefront, many fewer birds are dying.
But skyscrapers make up a tiny percentage of all buildings. Ordinary homes end up killing many more birds.
You find a few different ways to approach
this.
Yeah,
absolutely. This is acid etching here.
So Damian Ruffner at Philadelphia's Discovery Center has suggestions.
It comes in this roll of tape.
Small vinyl dots can break up the reflection, so can P-cord.
Any vertical lines, 4 inches or less.
But intentionally blocking a view, that can be a tough sell.
We've seen these other solutions that go right on the glass, etching, dots, these types of things. Are any of those possibilities for you guys?
That is something that we definitely could look into. The one thing is that we don't want to take away the luster of our beautiful double pane windows.
That's the rub, yeah.
Right, right.
But the visibility Keith Russell cares most about is that his city finally seems to notice its birds.
This is something you've cared about for a long time. It must be gratifying to see the general public start to care about this too.
It's really amazing. After having worked, in this area for so long, really warms my heart.
Coming up on Eye on America, with the rise of electric vehicles comes a demand for high-performing batteries. But what will happen when all these batteries die? We have the answer next. Now hitting the road. Nearly 1.8 million Americans registered electric cars in 2020. The batteries charging them should last 10 to 20 years. The dilemma? They aren't all reusable. But CBS Chicago's Lauren Victory tells us one engineer discovered a way to keep billions of batteries out of landfills.
Cobalt, nickel, manganese, graphite. The science inside the Argonne National Laboratory might make your head spin.
Let's take it from here.
But Lauren Valentino is here to simplify the complex. Literally, the Department of Energy engineer is developing a way to break down hard-to-reuse batteries.
We have to be able to divert some of this waste from landfills.
Historically, recycling batteries was tricky business. This video shows a single AA contains multiple entangled layers.
We need to separate out the valuable components from the contaminants. Our main goal in this project is to develop easy, cheap, and scalable processes that can be used to recycle battery materials.
This work is becoming increasingly important as more and more electric vehicles hit our roads. Imagine almost 200 of these batteries in your standard Chevy Volt and thousands of these in a Tesla.
Valentino's recycling experiment begins with crushing and shredding. These battery bits become something called black mass. That's liquefied when mixed with acid.
We have been creating the materials that go inside the separation device.
Her mock setup for our cameras demonstrates the last step, deionization. Now imagine this process being used to recycle the more than 3 million electric vehicle batteries expected in our global stockpile by 2025.
As a scientist, you're always happy and excited to see that your experiments are working.
Getting charged up to make the world more sustainable.
As we close out our show, we take you behind the scenes of a new clothing line from one of the most iconic fashion brands. Ralph Lauren. But this time, the collection is inspired by historically Black colleges, telling the stories that represent a more diverse Americana. Vladimir Duthier sat down with the Spelman and Morehouse alumni behind the new line.
I have always believed in the American dream.
For over 50 years, Ralph Lauren's line of clothing has celebrated elegance and style with a romanticized vision of America. Now, its latest chapter of Americana, perhaps overdue, is a collection inspired by the archives of two historically Black colleges and universities, featuring an all-Black production team and models from Spelman and Morehouse colleges.
Previously, the way that we showed collegiate style to the world was really through a white Ivy League lens.
Alumni Dara Douglas and James Jeter were behind that collaboration. They drew inspiration from the clothing worn by students attending HBCUs throughout the decades.
This was a love letter to Spelman and Morehouse. It was also a love letter to all HBCUs.
But it was really more about putting a spotlight on the incredible style of individuals at these HBCUs in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. This wasn't Black style, this wasn't white style, it was American style.
Jeter conceived the idea following the events of summer 2020.
In the wake of George Floyd's murder, you were questioning whether or not you even wanted to stay here, even though you'd spent your entire career at Ralph Lauren.
Absolutely. And, I think a lot of brands made commitments in 2020, Ralph Lauren included, but 2021, it's really about doing the actual work. None of my heroes looked like me, and I said that to Ralph.
And Jeter says Lauren listened. Though the label historically included Black models like Naomi Campbell and Tyson Beckford when other campaigns lagged on diversity, through the ages, Ralph Lauren has been seen as the paragon of Ivy League prep, elite society, and some have even said waspiness. But its creator was none of those things. He was a Jewish kid from the Bronx.
When Ralph Lipschitz started this company, he was an outsider himself.
Exactly.
Ralph didn't grow up as a part of the Ivy League school, so he made that world for himself, and he built a dream.
What do you say to people who will say, well, yeah, there's an opportunity to make some money here?
It's so much bigger than, again, the money. I think it's about a little girl walking by a billboard and seeing herself up in the sky.
How important is it to see yourself represented in these spaces?
It's profoundly important.
Professor David Wall Rice was in the campaign. He says Jeter's vision included an open dialogue about complex issues.
Some historians who've said, well, this clothing that the brand represents is clothing that Black people have had to wear to occupy white spaces. And if anything, this might be a way to simply make money.
I think that's fair. Now, one of the things that I would say is that as we're talking about how it is that Black folks show up in the world, there's no singular way of doing that. In suggesting how it is that Black folk have to wear clothes to do a certain thing, I think that divorces us from agency.
Wall Rice says Black Americans have spent 400 years adapting and finding ways to navigate the American cultural landscape.
I'm thinking now of Du Bois's classic note and construct of double consciousness, where there is the Black cultural and there's also the American cultural. And in many times they're at loggerheads. These were some of the clothes that we built America in. We also picked cotton. And so we had clothing for that as well. And I think that this collaboration was an effort of realizing us doing things more boldly, more fully, and telling, more accurate stories.
And James Jeter says there are more chapters ahead.
And so this is just the beginning. Ralph has told so many stories over the last 54 years, but has so many stories to tell.
For more stories like these and live coverage of breaking news 24/7, stream us right here on CBS News. I'm Michelle Miller. Thank you for watching Eye on America.